Well, it's a great pleasure to be here because this is an important theme. And what I want to do is just talk for a few minutes about the wider context which persuaded me to do the job, for one thing, and leads me to believe that what you're talking about is absolutely crucial to the country's future. And I don't think I'm exaggerating in saying that. And I start really from, and I'm a retired banker, as you may or may not know, and I spent 28 years in an international bank, saw the crisis developing and saw through the crisis from a financial sector perspective. And as I look back on the financial and economic crisis, what you see is that Britain increasingly had a growth model that was unsustainable and unbalanced. If you look at the way in which the country was growing in the years from about 2000 to 2007, you can see very clearly what was happening and what was going wrong. The headline growth rate was not bad, actually, and indeed we, the Brits, were telling ourselves we were doing rather better than some of our competitors across the channel, for one thing, and we seemed to have found a formula that was magical and could go on forever. The trouble was that the growth was coming essentially from two sources. The growth was coming from consumption fueled by debt, and in the latter years from government spending. And what anybody knows is that consumption fueled by debt is not a sustainable formula for growth, and government spending cannot continue the way it was going on then. Indeed, we actually have to rein it in, which is a key cornerstone of the current government strategy for reasons that I think you will all recognise. Not only that, but if you look at what the growth was going into in terms of sectoral contribution, the three fastest growing sectors of the economy, as measured by employment at that time, were financial services, you won't be surprised to hear that, construction and property. And indeed, if you look at private sector employment in the years 2000 to 2007, what you see is a very interesting graph, which kind of tells you all you need to know about what was going wrong in the economy. Just private sector, staying out public sector employment. Private sector employment in those three sectors I just mentioned, financial services, construction and property, was growing linearly upwards at quite a steep gradient from the period 2000 through 2007. And manufacturing and agriculture, obviously mostly manufacturing, but agriculture is in the same bucket, going downwards at almost exactly the same gradient. And a third category, represented by other services, hotels, restaurants, hairdressers and such, bumping along the middle and going up slightly. If I'd added public sector employment, the picture would be even worse, because certainly in the latter years, public sector employment was rising rather fast. And indeed, by the dawn of the crisis, virtually all of the employment creation was coming in the public sector. You don't need me to tell you that that's not a formula that can persist. And sure enough, we had a very unpleasant headache and had a lot of lessons to learn from the crisis. And looking forwards, the economics textbooks tell you that there are only four sources of demand that drive growth. There's the consumer, funded by debt or not. There's government. There's net exports and investment. And what we know going forward is that the first two categories aren't going to drive growth, indeed can't drive growth going forwards. The growth that this economy has to find over the next 5, 10, 15 years has got to largely be in the categories of net exports and investment. Which is why when I was asked to take on the job of trade and investment, I was actually firstly honoured to be asked and secondly thrilled to take it on, because I think this is absolutely crucial to this country's future. Net exports have been a difficult performance for this country. Most of the time since the war, British trade has been in net deficit and has therefore acted as a drag on growth instead of a contributor to growth. We have to turn that round. Actually, on investment, we've had a rather better story to tell. We've actually done quite well at attracting foreign direct investment into the British economy. We are, and still are, one of the top 2 or 3 destinations of foreign direct investment. And indeed, the car industry we've got now wouldn't exist were it not for foreign direct investment, for instance. So FDI is very important to us. I want to come back to some of the challenges we face looking forwards in terms of investment, but I want to dwell primarily on the trade side and with reference particularly to small businesses and entrepreneurship. You could, in simple terms, say the trade challenge is about two kinds of things. One, the very big exporters, and helping them in their already well-established businesses around the world, dealing with market access barriers and that kind of thing, and that's a very important role for the government. But I think the real challenge and the real exciting opportunity, and I do think it's an opportunity because I think we have the fundamental competitive strength to do this, lies in the SME world. Lies in encouraging more SMEs to get involved in exports. We have quite a good track record of this, but actually we're less good at this than, say, the Germans or the French in terms of the percentage of SMEs who are currently involved in exporting. And the evidence is, and it's really quite striking and very interesting, that as an SME gets involved in the export markets, so they tend to be the more innovative. That tends to be what makes them look across the water to start with. But they tend also to be the more efficient. You're perhaps not surprised to hear that. The really interesting thing is that they get more efficient as they do it. And the effect is not marginal. The research shows it. It's very well-based research. There's something like a productivity efficiency of something like a third in the first year, on average, coming from getting involved in exports. And the advantages continue as it branches out into other markets. So there's a huge imperative, I believe, both a huge opportunity and an imperative, because this tells you this is not just about dealing with Britain's trade account, which we do have to do, it's also about strengthening the backbone of the economy. Now, you can approach this task by saying the glass is either half full or half empty. And there's the kind of person in the world who always assumes the glass is half empty, or there's the kind of person who I suspect is most of the people in this room, and certainly including me, who thinks the glass is half full. And I say that because when you go around the country, I've been in this job just 9 weeks, and because I was previously in an international bank and going around the world a lot, I said what I want to do to start with is to go around this country and meet with businesses, large, small, varied, in different regions, so that I can really understand what the issues are from right on the shop floor, so to speak. And what I have discovered is what the statistics tell you, but I've now seen it from my own eyes, that everywhere you look, every region of the country, every sector, and every size of company, you can find leading-edge, world-class competence. And you'll find examples of drive and determination. You find people who have taken the plunge, and there are all sorts of stories I could tell you. But to be very clear, when I talk about innovation, this is not about high-tech. It does, of course, include high-tech, but it's absolutely wrong to limit it to high-tech. I was in one day in Cambridge, introduced to two companies, one of whom made digital inkjet printers, exported 90% of its output, world-class in a very particular niche, and to a company called Hotel Chocolat, which I suspect may be known to many of you, which is engaged in a rather more traditional business, chocolate, but where the innovation comes from the packaging, the branding, the distribution, and now they're branching out into high street stores, not merely in this country, but around the world. Innovation can be high-tech, can be traditional, can be smaller companies, can be larger companies, but it's there, and it's there in every sector of the economy. And what the job of the government is to make sure that we're facilitating, helping in every way that we reasonably can, companies to take that step into the export domain. I met one company the other day who had a business that was 60% domestic and 40% exports in the run-up to the crisis. During the crisis, their domestic business collapsed by 90%. You could have said this is a disaster. Actually, what they did was to go out and export more, and they tripled their export volumes, and so their revenue line has actually grown. Now, it's not always that easy. There are plenty of challenges, of course. But my main message is a very simple one. I think exporting is essential for this country. I think we have competitive strengths to build on. I think we have world-class competencies dotted around the businesses of this land, and actually we have a collective opportunity and challenge to rise to. This is, to be very clear, a marathon and not a sprint. Britain's had a weak trade performance since the war, as I mentioned. If there were any magic wands to be waved, they'd have been waved by now. So this is about a lot of detailed work, both overseas, amongst embassies and UKTI, working overseas, and also up and down this country, making sure that the right support is available. We produced a white paper a month ago. I think it's a rather good document, and I can say that completely unabashedly because I had nothing to do with the production of it. I've only been there 9 weeks. And I think it's a rather good statement of a reasonable policy approach to trade, both at the multilateral level, the EU and all those kinds of discussions, but also about support for business. In particular, in terms of export finance, it unveiled a new approach with ECGD, which have essentially, for the last 20 years, taken themselves out of being relevant to SMEs. And these new products, bog standard stuff, available in France and Germany and Canada and elsewhere, are now being introduced, and not over the next 18 or 24 months, but actually this month and next. I think that's a very concrete and practical step. I think there are other issues to address on the finance front. I am a former banker. I think it is very important that the banks play their role in supporting SMEs. And the commitment that the banks gave to the government as part of the famous Project Merlin, you may or may not have followed the intricacies of that, but as far as lending commitments, 15% growth year on year in lending to SMEs is a chunk of change. And you can be reasonably assured that the government will be leaning down their necks to make sure that they do actually follow through on that. I think there are other issues to deal with, and I certainly don't want to stand here saying we've got all of our ducks in a row, but I do stand here saying this is a challenge that we can rise to. This is an opportunity for this country to turn the corner towards a more sustainable growth model, and this is an area where SMEs play an entrepreneurship that goes with SMEdom, plays an absolutely crucial part. So I think that's probably enough from me. I know that you wanted to allow some time for discussion, and I hope I've at least said something provocative enough to provoke some discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll agree and right.